And welcome back to ABC-7 Extra Sunday. I'm Mark Ross. My conversation with Dr. Okachika Alozie, infectious disease doctor with Sunset West Health and ABC-7 medical contributor, continues. Dr. Alozie, we've heard about the norovirus. Is that considered a respiratory illness?
So it is not. I will say something because I've gotten a lot of questions about this. Apparently on TikTok or somewhere, there's this conversation that when people are doing a number 2 and they flush without closing it, you can create what are called plumes. This is true, but we've known this for over 40 or 50 years. And so that's one way to avoid getting what's called fecal oral transmission. The actual way to avoid something like norovirus, which is a GI bug, is wash your hands, right? Whether you're doing a 1 or a 2, whether you're about to cook, wash your hands. The more you wash your hands and the cleaner your hands are, the harder it is to transmit a norovirus to other people.
Now we're starting to hear about a respiratory illness that hasn't been on our radar for decades. Tuberculosis, TB. Kansas dealing with a major outbreak of TB right now.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been on my radar since I've been a medical student. Again, I went to med school in Nigeria, and so there's a lot of TB in sub-Saharan Africa. As a resident and fellow in Minnesota, we have a large immigrant population, and living on the border, if you look at the data, we actually have either the first or second highest percentage of incidents of TB coming up from Mexico, right? And so I think that TB or Mycobacterium tuberculosis is another organism that gets in your lungs. Typically, the human body just walls it off, right? It forms a little cavity or forms a little, what's called a granuloma in your lungs, and you never think about it again. Over time, depending on what kind of life you have, are you diabetic, are you on Humira, do you have RA, you take one of these long-term steroids, it can then affect you from there.
So what causes TB?
So it's I'm stumbling on that word, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and it is airborne, right? So that is one of the things, just like SARS-CoV-2, that an N95 is specific to, right? So in the hospital, we have to do what's called fit testing, where they measure us, and if I was doing a lot of TB work, I'd have to actually shave because you can't have facial hair and wear the proper mask or a PAPR. And then people that get it, like I said, typically gets walled off, your body takes care of it. Over time, unfortunately, it can then develop into full-blown TB where you have cavities or holes in your lungs. It can cause a pneumonia. TB is actually one of those bacteria that is called the great mimicker because it can go anywhere. It can cause Pott's disease, which is TB of the spine. It can cause TB meningitis. It can go to the liver, spleen, pancreas. It can go a lot of different places, and it's really hard to treat.
What are the signs and symptoms of tuberculosis?
You know, typically, and I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but there are 2 types of TB. There's what's called LTBI, or latent tuberculosis infection, and that's the person sort of like me, went to med school in Nigeria, was exposed to tuberculosis, my body took care of it, but if you test me for it, the test will show you've been exposed. Typically what we do for those persons is we do a chest x-ray. If the chest x-ray is normal, then we'll have a conversation about treating them for latent tuberculosis, either a 4, 6, or 9 month period, and they're good. Unfortunately, in persons that, like I said, have different immune systems, maybe have a high burden of tuberculosis, the unfortunate patients that are in Kansas that are experiencing this outbreak, it can then start to cause lung disease. And one of the biggest signs that we see is respiratory, right? And these people have hemoptysis, or they start coughing up blood, or they just have a chronic cough. It can be really hard in like a chronic smoker who's been coughing for 10, 15, 20 years to know that they have tuberculosis because they've always been coughing. The change, however, and we talk about this in people that have lung cancer, is, hey, has your sputum changed? Has the color changed, the consistency? Are you suddenly coughing up blood? And that's a very different conversation in terms of how we treat it. It's usually 4-drug therapy, 6 to 9 months, and it can actually come back often.
Okay, so what's the best way to treat it, and how do you, what do you do? Is there a vaccine still for tuberculosis?
There is not a vaccine that is available for tuberculosis. You know, when we talk about TB prevention, it's staying away from people that have TB. The good thing is that up until this Kansas outbreak, the reality is that almost all the tuberculosis in the United States was in people that were foreign born. So people like me. And so if you're born in the United States and you're not doing high grade biomedical research, then you really didn't have a problem, right? And so that wasn't an issue. Once you are tested, or you have to, in healthcare, medical school, nursing school, pharmaceutical school, whatever the case is, if they test you and you come out positive, the recommendation is to get treated so that it goes away and you don't have to worry about that long term.
ABC-7 medical contributor Dr. Okachika Alozie, always some great insight from you, sir. Thanks so much for being on Extra.
It's always fun. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Ross. Stay safe, stay strong, and I'll see you next Sunday night.
Thank you for watching. ABC-7 News is now available on any of these streaming services, as well as the KVIA News and KVIA Weather and Traffic apps.